Dementia Researcher with a blog and a rating.
Blog for the Dementia Researcher. Not a good advert for dementia. Although my substantive post is with ENRICH Scotland, I still retain a few hours within the Neuroprogressive and Dementia Network, NDN, in Scotland, which occasionally involves supporting the Scottish Dementia Brain Tissue Bank. This is a collaboration between the University of Edinburgh's Alzheimer Scotland Dementia Research Centre and the NDN. I tend to think of my role and those like me as the foot soldiers. We're the ones who actually turn up at front doors armed with paperwork, consent forms and gratitude that the sat-nav works in rural Scotland. I won't go into huge detail about the brain tissue bank itself, as the information is readily available online, but once someone has expressed an interest, had the process explained and discussed consent, they may then have the pleasure of a visit from a clinical studies officer like myself. During these visits, and hopefully after the tea and biscuits, we establish capacity, obtain the appropriate consent and carry out a range of assessments. The outcomes are then registered and later become available to researchers when the brain tissue donation occurs post-mortem. It is serious and important work and heavily reliant on the goodwill of participants and family considering and agreeing to hand over their bodies when the time comes. Alongside the original face-to-face visits, annual follow-ups are carried out using a telephone-based cognitive assessment called the FreeCog. Ideally, the same assessor carries out these each year to provide continuity, as people tend to respond better when they're speaking to someone vaguely familiar rather than a random stranger suddenly asking them to remember words and dates out of nowhere. The assessment itself is designed to be telephone-friendly and covers several areas, intended to record any cognitive deterioration over time. It was during one of these calls that I began wondering whether all people with dementia actually see themselves as belonging to one collective group, in the way researchers, healthcare staff and policymakers sometimes do. The trigger came during the first question of a recent assessment. "Can you tell me anything that's been in the news recently?" I asked. After a couple of seconds, the lady, who had relatively mild Alzheimer's disease, replied, "There's not much good happening in the world just now, but I'll tell you, he's not a very good advert for dementia, is he?" Now, I'll leave folks to decide for themselves who she may have been referring to. Suffice to say, I didn't think she was talking about the latest Bake Off finalist. What struck me afterward was not simply the humour or the sharpness of the comment, but the assumption sitting underneath it. Her remark suggested she did not simply see herself as part of some broad, undifferentiated dementia community. Instead, she appeared to view others in exactly the same way the rest of us might view anybody else in public life, with judgment, opinions, criticism and perhaps a touch of exasperation. It did make me wonder whether we, in research, healthcare and policy making, are often more invested in the idea of the dementia community than many people actually living with dementia are themselves. Healthcare systems have always naturally grouped people together because systems more or less depend upon categories. We discuss cohorts, pathways, interventions and lived experience groups. They are useful and necessary concepts, but they're not always how individuals see themselves. Despite extensive research into person-centred care, the old appendix and bed 4 mentality can still occasionally linger in healthcare. Scott in 2022 concluded that a one-size-fits-all approach to helping people navigate their lives following a dementia diagnosis does not comport. And perhaps, even though we all know that, we need to be reminded occasionally. Most people don't abandon the identity that they've built up over 7 or 8 decades because of a diagnosis. They remain the retired joiner from Galashiels or the former Church of Scotland minister from Dunbar, or the woman still convinced nobody else in Scotland can make soup like she does. Dementia may become part of their lives, but not necessarily the defining membership card of some collective movement. In truth, people with dementia probably view others with dementia in much the same way the rest of us view each other. Some they warm to instantly, others perhaps less so. A diagnosis does not suddenly create automatic solidarity any more than owning a Labrador or supporting Scotland at football creates universal harmony. If anything, the latter generally creates collective disappointment interspersed with brief optimism every 28 years. Working in research, you occasionally catch yourself unconsciously speaking about people with dementia, as though they represent one unified voice, when in reality they remain gloriously individual. Some become passionate advocates for research and awareness campaigns, as we now frequently see through their involvement in conferences and research events. Others prefer privacy and quietly getting on with life, with the diagnosis just another thing they have to deal with day to day, like arthritis. Some want to discuss clinical trials and policy reform, while others would much rather discuss horse racing, grandchildren, or why the council no longer empties the bins properly, a favourite topic regardless of cognitive state. Something that still surprises me after many years is how humour survives. Not universally, of course, but often far longer than society expects. Likewise, personality, political opinions, and the ability to deliver a devastating one-liner at precisely the moment healthcare professionals ask daft questions. Anyone who's spent time working around dementia will know that cognitive impairment does not necessarily diminish someone's capacity to hold very firm views on politicians, football referees, or the price of a bacon roll in a garden centre. Perhaps that is actually reassuring. Dementia may alter cognition, memory, and function over time, but individuality often remains remarkably intact. Beneath the diagnosis, there's still a person with their own preferences, prejudices, humour, and worldview. Sometimes healthcare remembers that well, and sometimes, if we're honest, systems unintentionally smooth people into categories because categories are easy to manage on spreadsheets and meeting agendas. Yet every so often, a supposedly routine telephone cognitive assessment reminds you otherwise, usually with one perfectly timed sentence.
Thank you for listening. Join the Dementia Research bloggers and share your own views.